us. This is a big deal. Nothing else in creation did he counsel within himself to create. Yet we see this, let us make. He created in our image and in our likeness. It's not made after its kind. If you notice, everything else was made after its kind. The grass, the fruit trees, the birds, the great sea monsters, the cattle, the creeping things, the swarming things, everything created, everything generated, populated, multiplied after their kind. They were distinct beings or creatures that would promulgate just like those distinct things. But notice, he's not creating mankind after mankind's image as if it is by itself or as if it's just related to us. No, he created mankind in his image. What is his image?
Do all people have the image of God, or do only Christians eventually obtain the image of God once they are saved in Jesus?
I can't leave that. I can't really leave that alone. I can't leave that alone.
Welcome back to Open Scripture, where we seek to sharpen the way the church reads her foundational texts. My name is Nick Nail, Tracy McKenzie, and we're just going to go right back to where we left off in the middle of day 6 of the creation account, the preparation week of Genesis 1. And we were kind of highlighting some maybe certain facts or features within day 6 that are really important, little key textual features. And we're going to talk about 5 more. But before we get there, I just want to pause because there's a lot of things, a lot of different ways to take Genesis 1. And I want to ask you about your approach to Scripture. And there's some big seminary words that explain kind of how we approach Scripture, but not to get into some of those words, but why is your take of reading this different than maybe some other people who focus on the historical accounts or just different approaches, to the text?
I think that's a great question because, I want to say there are many different approaches to Genesis 1, and we are taking a particular approach. This approach really stems from the view that God, through his Spirit, inspired men to write these accounts, right? And this would be called the inspiration of the Scriptures, if you will. And he did that through men, right? So this stems from several different verses in the New Testament. But because he inspired them to write these texts in a way that is superintended by God, then I'm trying to follow the intention that we see in these texts. So it's really these texts that are inspired, not, and when I say inspired, that is like breathed out by God. That's the word that Paul uses in 2 Timothy 3:16.
Right.
So it's these texts that are breathed out by God for revelation. We're not primarily trying to discern history.
Right.
That is also, of course, governed by God and is sovereign, but that's not what we're trying to figure out. And I think a lot of people look at these accounts and they think, oh, what was going on in the history of this? And they frame these words of Genesis 1 against outside the Bible history, if you will, or understandings of history. Or they frame this account of Genesis 1 against the other ancient creation narratives. Or they frame the words of Genesis 1 against modern science views. They're trying to explain how old rocks are in the Grand Canyon, or they're trying to explain Genesis 1 in relationship to the Enuma Elish. All of these are different ways to approach Genesis 1. I'm just saying that because of my view on inspiration, that I think God used men and inspired these texts, that I want to stay as close to the intention that I see in the text as possible.
Yeah. So that's an argument for what we would call biblical inerrancy, right?
Yes.
And so biblical infallibility, and
Yes.
we're giving the author the right to say, what this means.
That's right.
And it's not, our interpretation is not open to interpretation. It's based on what the author has to say. We need to seek to find that
Yeah.
as the conclusion.
Yeah. And again, this is, a great kind of way to segue into this particular unit. I've worked hard to kind of show the framework of this, the structure. Days 1 through 3 correspond to days 4 through 6. We've worked hard to show why day 6 is the climax of the account. We've spent 2 or 3 episodes on this. And part of this is because I'm trying to give evidence for this particular interpretation. Because again, there are, sometimes other Christians, right, who are arguing, no, the 7th day is what's important here.
Yeah.
Or again, the age of the age of the universe is what's important here. And I'm saying, no, this is what's important, and this is why it's important.
Yeah.
Because we can discern intentionality.
And what's really cool about the author is he uses certain things, if you've pointed out, in the framework to highlight different things about, repeating phrases.
That's right.
That God created was repeated 3 times when man shows up on the scene.
Yep.
Or it was good, and he saw that it was good. So you see the creativity of the author as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very good. And so in this episode, we're basically going to really talk about the significance of the 6th day. So whereas before we've been talking about the reason why we're heading for the 6th day, now we're going to talk about the significance.
Okay.
And again, this is where, you brought up in the last episode, where our focus in a sermon should be. This is where I would say we can really apply some of this in this particular day and in this particular episode. So let me start with, we mentioned 5 things. I can just repeat those real quickly here. We have the number of words allotted to this day. We have the very good instead of just good. We have the poetry in the middle of it. We have the term create 3 times, and we have the wordplay between bless and create. So those are kind of 5 content reasons. Now, in addition to that, notice on the 6th day, there is not the impersonal let something be, let there be, or let the earth do this. No, in this particular act of creation on the 6th day, the second act here on day 6, we don't have anything impersonal. We have first-person deliberation in the Godhead. Let us make. Now, we could briefly say, there are many different questions. What's the us? Some think it's angels. Some think it's the stars and so on and so forth. I think all of those fail for a couple different reasons. I do think this is a Trinitarian reference.
Yeah.
We've already seen the Spirit of God in Genesis 1:2. We know that Genesis 1:1, even the Bereshit, we know that the author is going to get to the Son of God, the Son of Judah, the Most High. So there's no reason not to think of a triune Godhead. It isn't all, all of systematic theology is not here yet.
Right.
But we know there are different, things here that are going to refer to the triune God, namely the Father, the Son, and the Spirit.
And quick question on that. Can we, we as Christians that believe in the Trinity and understand the Trinity, we could look backwards and see this as a Trinitarian element. Would the maybe original readers or a Jewish reader have thought something like that?
No, I don't think they would be necessarily be thinking the Trinity. But they would have been thinking the Spirit of God and the Son of God.
Okay.
And God the Father.
Yeah.
Right. And again, I also noticed that you mentioned maybe the original readers, right? And this kind of takes us back to who are the intended readers. And remember, the author here is writing for the last days. So remember in the poems, he's talking, okay, this is what's going to happen in the last days. This is what's going to happen in the last days. This is what's going to happen in the last days. And he's going to have this, the nations are going to be obedient to him. And then we think about Genesis 1 through 11. Here he's talking about all mankind. So the author is really interested in a future reader.
So we could be included as the original readers.
I think we are included in the original. And that's why we say the Bible is for you, right? And it's about you because it's about the last days.
Yeah.
And we know that that begins when the King comes. So this first-person deliberation in the Godhead, think about this for a minute. This means that God purposely deliberated and counseled within himself before he created mankind. This is no accident. This is no it's not chance. This is not atoms bumping against other atoms. No, this is literally the Bible saying God counseled within himself before he created you and me. That's a big deal. And we're going to do this several times as we talk about the significance. But if you think about the difference in the Judeo-Christian worldview, that just means basically the worldview of the Bible, we now see a being who is intentionally discussing, planning, counseling within himself to create mankind. There's intention here. And I think he wants you to know something about this. And I think we can take away something about our purpose here from this. This is a big deal. Nothing else in creation did he counsel within himself to create. All right, so that's the first thing that'd be significant. We see this, let us make, he created in our image and in our likeness. There is a second thing here, and this is, it's not made after its kind. If you notice, everything else was made after its kind. I mean, the grass, the fruit trees, the birds, the great sea monsters, the cattle, the creeping things, the swarming things, everything created, everything generated, populated, multiplied after their kind. So in a sense, they were distinct beings or creatures that would promulgate just like those distinct things. But notice this. He's not creating mankind after mankind's image as if it is by itself or as if it's just related to us. No, he created mankind in his image. Now, we have a lot of heavy lifting to do. I don't know if we need to get into it this episode. What is his image?
The image of God.
Of course, there's been so much ink spilled on this. So maybe we can save that for a moment, or we could even answer that in the question answer. That would be a great question for you to write into info@open-scripture.org. Remember, we're going to do a question and answer session over Genesis 1. That could be something we could get into.
Could I give an example of a question?
Yeah.
One question might be, do all people have the image of God, or do only Christians eventually obtain the image of God once they are saved in Jesus? Like, there might be some distinction there between different
I can't leave that. I can't really leave that alone. I can't leave that alone. Again, if we think about the intention of the author here, notice there's nothing about, becoming a Christian here. And what's crazy is this author is going to have something to say in this particular book, not in Genesis, but in the Pentateuch.
Yeah.
In this book, probably too. But he's going to have something specific to say about what it means to become a Christian. Now, again, a lot of people would think I'm crazy about this, but when we get to the end of Deuteronomy, we will know what it means to be a child of God. And but here we don't see any of that. So I think this relates to all mankind, which we'll, again, come to here in a minute. So just maybe a super brief thing. There have been many things on what this image of God is. I'm going to say it's going to relate to a couple things. A lot of people think it's functional. That is, it's related to their function, because in the verse right after this, it says, let them rule.
Yeah.
right? In the clause right after this, right? Made in the image of God, let them rule. But there is something also about gender, because if you remember in the poetry of verse 27, the thing that sticks out in the parallel lines is gender.
Mm-hmm. He created them male and female.
Male and female, he created them. So again, there's something about gender that also relates to the image of God. And we might ask, just as a little bit of a teaser, what is the next subunit, the next literary subunit about? Genesis 2. Right? This would be a question. Let's just leave this hanging out there, right? What is Genesis 2 primarily about that relates to gender? I've almost given it away there in my hint. And then what happens in Genesis 3 related to gender? This will be significant. And again, we'll just let that hang there. Hopefully get you to come back in our next episodes as we talk about Genesis 2 and 3. Now, again, this relates to the image of God. I'm just suggesting here for the moment that it relates to mankind as it relates to gender, and mankind in our purpose of ruling and subduing. Also, mankind in the idea of image and likeness, because these words refer really to, again, like a statue gives off an image of who it was created after. That's what these words are used with, this idea, again, in the Hebrew Bible in the ancient Near East. And one other thing, that in Genesis 5 and Genesis 9, the author returns to these ideas of image and likeness. And it says there that Seth was born in the image and likeness of Adam, as Adam was in the image and likeness of God. So Adam in Genesis 5 is literally a son of God.
Yeah.
Not explicitly,
Right.
but he is literally a son of God, as Seth was Adam's son. And then even in Luke 3, Luke, back all the way over in the New Testament, Luke calls, when he's going through the genealogy, he calls Adam a son of God.
Yep.
And again, so we can see here that Adam is in the image of God, and he is meant to give that image of God. He, she, they are meant to give that image of God over all of creation. All right, so again, there is another thing. The third thing here that I just mentioned there is mankind is given dominion over all other things. Now, let me say a couple things here, and I want to go back to even the previous one, in the image of God. So he's given dominion, they are given dominion, and they are in the image of God. So first of all, let me say that this is both man and woman, because again, the imperatives are plural here.
Right.
So they are the ones that are to rule and subdue. This is not just mankind. This is not just Adam.
Right.
This is a plural. And he had just said male and female, and then he said, let them rule. So I'll come back to this in the gender when I talk about gender here in a moment, but this is a big deal that both of them are given this plural to rule and to subdue and given dominion. Now, I also want to say here, think a bit about how the Judeo-Christian worldview, the worldview that is right here, think of how this is different than a purely mechanistic, we could say atheistic, or we could say naturalistic. Those are all just kind of big words to talk about, a view of the world without God as its creator. Think about how different this worldview is than that worldview. If you take a mere atheistic or naturalistic, mechanistic view of how this world came into being, what are we imaging or reflecting?
Ourselves?
Maybe ourselves. But again, don't forget, in an evolutionary or a naturalistic view of how we came into being, we literally are atoms. We came from atoms bumping into one another.
Atoms, ATOMS, not
Yeah,
Adam.
not atoms.
Yeah.
That's right. Atoms, good. That's funny. Yes, I mean, if you think about it, single cell microbes that popped into existence out of nothing. So we're not created in anybody's image.
Yeah.
We just are by chance. And think about this as it relates to purpose. In the Judeo-Christian worldview, in the biblical worldview here, we are given a purpose. And I think that purpose is ruling, subduing over our sphere. And that's related to all creation, the birds, the fish, the fowl, the creeping things, the grass, again, over everything, right? And that, because that's what he said. He's given us dominion over everything. So literally, we have here a built-in purpose that God is giving to us. And think about how different that is than if we are just two cells which happen to come into being out of nothing, as impossible as that is anyway, to come out of being from nothing. But that's not my point here. My point here is think about how much purpose this text gives us as creatures who are created in the image of an eternal God.
Yeah.
I mean, the value of humanity is inestimable at that point. We should say something about racism while we're here as well. There can be no racism in a Judeo-Christian worldview. There can be no perspective that one race is valued more than another race. That would be utterly ridiculous as we look at this creation account where God created mankind in his image. And we just have to say, if there's the view amongst us where one race is valued more than another race, we just have to say that's wrong. And it's not according to the biblical account here.
Yeah.
All mankind was created in the image of God. And all mankind, that is male and female, which I'm going to come back to here in a minute, is given the purpose to rule and subdue. That's such a different worldview than if this is all just by chance.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, if it's just by chance, then we can have no purpose. There's no purpose.
Right.
And again, I think, atheists or evolutionists would argue with us here. It's like, no, there's purpose. There's, survival of the fittest or something. Well, again, that's just by chance that is a thing. It's not really a purpose. That's just the way it turned out because of the process, that they would describe as evolution.
Sure.
So I just, this never ceases to amaze me how much, this phrase is often used, capital is borrowed from a biblical worldview. And again, I think that's something our society has not really dealt with. I still think a lot of people in our society are operating as if there is no God. And we haven't thought through the implications, first of all, of how impossible it is that something can pop out of nothing. It just doesn't happen.
Right.
There's 0% chance of that happening. I don't care how many billions of years you want to posit, there's still a 0% chance of that happening. And yet that's what evolution or a naturalistic worldview wants to posit. And there can be no purpose.
Yeah.
And we haven't even gotten to the issue of morality at that point. But maybe we'll save that for another one. I want to come to the issue of gender. And again, we're going to say a lot about gender. We're going to say a lot about gender in Genesis 2 and 3 because, of course, gender is coming in those episodes. So we have a lot more to say about gender, but we have to say something here. And we have to say this here, that again, they were created, in verse 27, God created Adam, that is mankind, in his image. And mankind is singular right here. In the image of God, he created mankind. Again, mankind is singular here. And of course, God is singular when he created them. But then it goes and says, male and female, he created them. So notice that both genders are created in the image of God. And again, we have to kind of be strong on this point and emphasize this point, because there are those among us who think there's this difference in genders when it comes to creation. And, again, we'll say more about the relationship of man and woman and their roles when we come to Genesis 2 and 3. But here, we just have to basically romp and stomp on the fact that both of them are created in the image of God.
Yeah.
God does not look at woman and say, oh, she's less than man. They're equal. And we call this personal equality from Genesis 1. They both are equal. Both stand at the same on the same level before the foot of the cross and before the God who created them. They're both given the task to rule and subdue. We have plurals here. So, of course, this is a huge issue.
Yeah.
Gender, obviously, I would say obviously is an issue with the cattle and with the great sea monsters. The gender was already built into creation, we could say, but it wasn't mentioned.
Yeah.
And it's because the author wants to stop here and say something about the creation of man and woman in the image of God and their task of ruling that is going to be special for creation.
Yeah.
And I don't want to steal the thunder from Genesis 2 and 3, but there is one coming who's going to come from man and woman, who is going to be the image of God.
Right.
And of course, we're talking about the Lord Jesus here. But we're not there yet. But we can't have the Son of God without man and woman. And again, the long history that is going to give us Jesus of Nazareth some many years after this. All right. And finally, let me just say a quick word here. I already mentioned this in the last episode, but this fact that God spoke to them. We see here the first notion of this phenomenon that we really opened this episode with, that God revealed himself in his word, right? God, the Bible says that God inspired this text that we're reading for teaching, for correction, for training in righteousness. He had to speak to us. He had to reveal something to us. And here in this First Testament, we see here that already in the account of creation, again, these two words stick out from all the other days, that God spoke to them. And here we have this idea of revelation. If we don't have revelation, in other words, if God doesn't break in to this history, to this experience, if God doesn't break into our experience, we're out on an ocean in a lifeboat without a paddle, with no map, no iPhone, nothing. We're just out there awash. And that would be what we're like if we don't have God's revelation to us. We can't get outside of ourselves.
Yeah.
Somebody has got to break in. And we see here in the creation account that God broke into this male and female and spoke to them and blessed them. And the doctrine of God's revelation is that in the scriptures, which is these texts, which we're trying to unpack and sharpen the way the church reads these, he speaks to the church in these scriptures. And this, again, is why we want to be so careful, and we want to call you to really a greater pursuit of reading these scriptures. And that's why we're doing these podcasts. We want to sharpen the way the church reads these texts because we think that in these texts we hear God's voice. And if we get it wrong, we don't hear God's voice. As a matter of fact, we're led astray.
Yeah.
And we're going to see the serpent tempt the woman by twisting what God had said. So we do have to be careful. I do also want to say also that in this idea of God's revelation to us, God also breaks into our historical experience another way. And he does this by the Son of God, right? The Son of God, who is the son of David, who is the son of Judah, the son of Abraham, who's just around the corner here in chapter 12. Honestly, he's the son of Shem, the son of Noah, the son of Enoch, the son of Seth, and the son of Adam. So, I mean, it all ties back to here. And he breaks into our historical experience and reveals God to us. So this is pretty strong language, and I just want to emphasize that he spoke to them.
Yeah.
So that gives us a lot to chew on.
For sure. You were preaching just then.
Yeah, I was preaching. That's right, I was preaching. So again, I just want to say that this sixth day is so unique. And I want to say, man, if you're struggling with purpose, hey, read Genesis 1, verses 26 through 28. If you're struggling with your concept of the genders and sexuality, read Genesis 1, 26 through 28, because there's no confusion here, right? There are these two biological sexes, male and female, and God created them with a purpose. If you're struggling, man, read these verses, meditate on the fact that God created you in his image. And he created you with purpose. I don't know. I just can't get over this, how unique this is.
Absolutely.
So love preaching this, love teaching this every semester in my classes.
Yeah. So that's day 6.
Day 6.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It ends with very good.
Very good.
So that's the last, that's the 7th and the final, and God saw that it was good. And of course it ends with very good. Should we say a few words about day 7?
Might as well.
Day 7 is very unique. It's different in almost every way.
Well, also, it's day 7's not even included in the chapter in our English text.
Yeah, it should be in this literary unit. Because really, we're going to see something different take place in verse 4 of chapter 2. So the next unit begins with something different.
Yeah.
So we know the next unit begins in verse 4. Also, the 7th is still talking about days. You want to read it very quickly?
Yeah, so this takes us to Genesis chapter 2. So the heavens and the earth and everything in them were completed. On the 7th day, God had completed his work that he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all the work that he had done. God blessed the 7th day and declared it holy, for on it he rested from all his work of creation.
All right, that's pretty interesting. I'd have a few ways I'd want to tweak that translation.
That was CSB.
That was CSB. Just read verse 3.
Verse 3, God blessed the 7th day and declared it holy, for on it he rested from all his work of creation.
All right, well, they do a very similar thing. We'll come to that. Let me just say, first of all, we see that it's the 7th day. 3 times we're mentioned, this is the 7th day. So we've got the ordinal number 7 there. We've got the day. So it's obvious that we're still in the creation week. But notice we don't have "and God said." Notice here on the 7th day, there is no "and God said," like all the other days. Moreover, there's no "let there be." Notice God doesn't speak. He speaks in all the other days.
Yeah.
He begins every other day by speaking. On the 7th day, there's no speaking. And there is no acting. All of these are narrative verbs. So the 7th day is mentioned 3 times. The fact that he did not work is mentioned 3 times. He rests, it says. He completed his work, all the work which he did. And also, because he uses the word create here, that he's no longer, that he doesn't create anymore. That's how the verse 3 ends. He also blesses the seventh day. So we see another create, we see another bless. So sure enough, he blesses the seventh day. One other thing that's unique, that's the first time we see it in the chapter, is he makes the day holy.
Yeah.
So he sets the day apart. And of course, this is where the idea of Sabbath comes from. Sabbath also comes from the idea that he rested on the seventh day there in verse 2. And he rests, of course, from all his work. Very big deal. He rests from all his work. He's completed his work. And then I want to close here at the end of verse 3. So God blessed the seventh day, and he made it holy, because in it, that's in the seventh day, he rested from all his work, which God created to do. So he uses both of these words here that we've seen used now in the chapter, the word create,
Yep.
and then the word to make.
Yeah.
And I suppose which he created to make might be a rendering that we can see here, that both of these kind of make verbs are used here. So we know this literary unit is coming to an end. And it's, again, very different. Now, the other thing that is probably maybe the number one difference here in this particular day is the fact that there is no "and God saw." There is no "and it was good."
Right.
And there is no "and there was evening and morning the seventh day." So in essence,
There's no closure.
there's no closure. There's no closure. The closure of the seventh day, which is rest, is still waiting. So it hasn't been closed yet. We don't even know for sure, I suppose, that it's good yet. Because again, there is no work of God here. So there is no "and God saw," because that would in part be work. We have no "and it was good."
So that has some theological implications then to think about.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the main thing, I think, is that there is still rest to be had. It's not done yet. And I think part of the implication here is there's still work that God is going to do. And so he's resting here. He stopped his work momentarily. But guess what Genesis 2 does? Genesis 2 backtracks in time and shows God working again. And the rest of the Bible is God working
Right.
in his creation that Genesis 1 has given us. So because God is still working, the rest is not finished. We could say there was no evening and morning to conclude the day. So you might think about that as we think about rest, where we find rest, how much we work, and what do we find our rest in. May I suggest that we find our rest in God's work when it is finished. And again, I might just note that we can see in what we call the Old Testament, God is continuing to work. He brings Adam and he brings Seth. He's going to bring Noah. He's going to bring Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And we just go right on down through the history of Israel, God's people, Israel, until we come to the Son of God, Jesus. And even Jesus is working, doing things. He talks about how his work is finished, but that doesn't mean God's work is finished, because the book of Acts open up with Jesus's works finishing, but the Holy Spirit is still doing something.
Right.
And again, we go right through the New Testament on into the book of Revelation. And we have a lot to talk about here because we have a lot of work to do in the scriptures.
Yeah.
But I hope this exposition, if you will, or this exegesis of the sixth day has helped you see how unique you are and how God has a special word for you as man or woman. And he's got a task for you. And first of all, I think that is to hear from him. He wants to speak to you. And I hope you'll join us next time when we begin the second literary unit in Genesis 2, 4, and following, where we see that the Bible is for you and about you.